Hey everyone, I am here with Kimberly Harter, and she is here in the Bay Area where I am. We were just saying, had we known, we might have been able to actually do an interview in person. It's rare to have someone with me so close, so this is really cool. But Kimberly has an amazing story. Oh my goodness, we're going to try and keep it short. We know it's hard to watch long videos, but there's just so much to fit in. She's had over a decade of struggle, diagnosed with fibromyalgia and Lyme disease and toxic mold exposure, and just tried everything under the sun like so many of us do, and things were not working. Conventional medicine, alternative medicine, but eventually did finally fully recover, and now is doing all sorts of incredible, amazing, inspiring things. So Kimberly, really happy to have you here. Thank you for doing this.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah. So what makes you want to tell your story now?
I was in such despair for so long. And the thing that made me believe that I could get better was seeing that other people that had very similar things to what I had been through were getting better, had fully recovered. And I didn't believe that it was possible for a long time. Like, my doctors were kind of telling me otherwise, and well, you're always going to live with X amount of things, or it's going to come in waves, and you're never going to fully heal. And so that was just my belief for like quite a while, until I decided that there was other than.
So how did this all start? When did this all start?
Yeah, so the key beginning for me was when I was 19. I was in college in Denver, and I was living in a water-damaged basement level dorm room. And I had in high school had like some things going on in childhood, had strep throat, and by high school was having like swollen knees. I was running track. I was very active in school and extracurricular activities, and I always felt sick. I always had something going on. I always had gut issues. Nothing was like stopping me in my tracks where like I couldn't go to school, or, even running track. I was going to a physical therapist. But there was I was getting swollen glands in my throat like once a year, and just having lots of things continuously happen. And when I was 19, I was actually running on a treadmill, and I started sneezing. Then my face started swelling up, my eyes started swelling shut. I ended up having a really severe anaphylactic shock, which I had no experience with, didn't know what was happening. I ended up being in a coma for like a day. And
oh my goodness.
That was what basically my body's lack of oxygen and the shutdown there just threw my body into haywire. So I ended up dropping out of school, moving back home, and just trying to figure out what was going on, with the intention to go back to school in the fall again. And that didn't end up happening. I saw doctor after doctor after doctor, was diagnosed with fibromyalgia pretty soon after that. And then there was no well, we can help you with that. Here's the cure. So we just were well, pain medicine was the only thing offered, and pain medicine didn't even work. So I was there's got to be something else. So I just watched Mystery Diagnosis constantly and just did as much research as possible. And 3 years later was diagnosed with Lyme disease. But that was the very start to an entire decade of trial and error with various different treatments all across the board, from standard Western medicine and pharmaceutical antibiotics to a whole myriad of different things that I tried.
Wow. I can't even imagine what this was like to start facing this so young and such scary symptoms. What were you thinking when all this was happening?
I think I had a lot of anxiety and depression, and I was being told that it was in my head. A lot of this was, dismissed. And even with the fibromyalgia diagnosis, basically they were saying well, we don't really know what to do about this. Yeah, it touches when we hurt you in all of these points, but all we can say is that you're in pain. And And then I was having just every system of the body was becoming affected, and having severe like sensory processing issues and all of these other things. Severe food allergies started developing. So I was like, wait, there's like so much more happening, but I don't have a reason for all this. And even in 2009, when I was diagnosed with Lyme disease, it was like I was on a blacklist of doctors here in the Bay Area finding somebody that would treat Lyme, because you couldn't go online and find a doctor that said that they treated Lyme disease at that time. So it was like everything felt like very hush hush, or like nobody believed me. And I think that was the hardest thing, was like, I know I'm sick. I know that something's not right here, but like I felt like nobody could help me, which is kind of ironic that in the end it's like, okay, well, that was exactly what I needed. I needed to find it within myself to heal myself, and outside sources were not going to do that. So for me, that wasn't my story.
I was wondering, and I was just thinking too, for people watching, I forget that before I lived here, I'd never heard of the Bay Area. So if you're watching and you're unsure and you're not from the US, like me, it's in Northern California. Just realized I should have clarified that. Yeah, I was very curious about the Lyme disease, because I also got a Lyme disease diagnosis, but yeah, treatment was, so did you get any kind of formalized treatment or any kind of treatment at all for the Lyme disease, and was it helpful?
So the first, no, to answer the question, just like flat out, but it was not helpful. But I did receive treatment in 2009. Right after the diagnosis, I started oral antibiotics, and then my body was rejecting. I couldn't keep them down. Then I went to injectables. My body was rejecting those. It literally wouldn't let me push it into my body. And then I had my first chest port put in. And then that was where they administered the IV antibiotics. 5 weeks into that treatment, I started having severe pain right here, and ended up with an infected gallbladder. Another thing that the doctors did not believe me about. And it wasn't until I needed like emergency surgery to get it out that like I was believed. So if you're not being believed, like stick with your gut, what's going on. And I think there's a little bit more awareness around that now. But for instance, in 2009, they were just playing around with this like long-term, like chronic Lyme disease treatment because the CDC is like, 2 weeks of antibiotics and you're good, And so there was no detox that was talked about. There was no supportive medicine. It was literally just pumping antibiotics in. I don't even remember if they were like, take a probiotic along with this. So basically we just ended that treatment after the gallbladder surgery. And then I was kind of like, what do I do now? Because this was my only option that I knew about. And so then that's when I started looking for alternative therapies for the first time. So we found another doctor that was a holistic doctor here, integrative doctor here in the San Francisco area, and ended up doing some various different treatments with her, with supplements, with more like natural IV things like vitamin C bags and different like natural treatments, and none of it really was doing much of anything. I was just experiencing more symptoms that were just slowly building. I was experiencing more food sensitivities. And so it was 2015 then that I went and did a 15-week treatment in Arizona. And that was a mix of natural antibiotics, pharmaceutical antibiotics. They even tried like a chemo like therapy that was being tested at that time. They did IRAD therapy, which is where they like lower your blood pressure or your glucose levels. That basically opens up the blood-brain barrier because it's trying to get as much sugar to the brain as possible. And so during that time, they pump when they see your blood sugars drop, they pump the antibiotics intravenously at that moment so that the brain opens up and you get the antibiotics to the brain. So that was another experimental treatment that I was a part of. During that time, we did a whole bunch of different IV bags and supplements. I was introduced to coffee enemas, which has been like amazing in my life. I've actually been using them again now just to keep my health at an optimal level. And so it was just this whole like learning experiment of being exposed to all this 15 weeks after, when the treatment was done, I like kind of maybe thought I was feeling better and was like, okay, this is going to be it. I'm going to do it. And then like less than a month later, I completely crashed and was like even worse than before that. So then I was kind of like, well, now I've tried everything from like, and so many treatments in between that too, in between the 2009 and the 2015 and 2017, I went back and tried. At this point, I was at my lowest weight. I was like 25 pounds less than I am now. And I was barely keeping any food down. Like feeding tube was being discussed because I was down to 10 food items. So I was eating meat and a handful of green vegetables that were cooked, and that was it, with some cooking oil, and that was literally my entire diet. And so I was having such bad candida and yeast problems. My whole body was broken out in like yeast rashes. It was just like couldn't shower. It was excruciating. So I tried this IV antifungal treatment called antidulafungin, which was experimental at that time as well. And that one almost killed me. That one, I was just like, I can't do this. I need to stop. And I ended up just like going home and trying to collect myself and say, like, is my body strong enough to even pull myself from a place of like every single system of my body, every tissue of my body is like so weak. Like I was having trouble understanding language. I didn't know how to use a computer. I couldn't drive. I couldn't be in a room with like the windows open or light on. I was living in these noise canceling headphones. I was wearing dark sunglasses, even in a room with the blinds closed. And my world was very, very small. I like barely could leave the room or get out of bed. Everything hurt, touch hurt, sounds, movement, light, everything. And even looking at my phone, I had like a super dark filter on my phone to be able to even see the screen of my phone. So, it was very dark and lonely. And this is where people who reach out to me ask me like, well, how sick were you? Like, how bad was it? And I'm like here to say, because they're in this place that I was in. And I'm here to say, like, if you're in that dark tunnel right now and like you're in your room and you can't get out of bed and you feel like there's no way out, there is a way out. It's finding the combination of things that work for you to get there. And the way that I did that was heavily through brain retraining, cold therapy, and breath work. And I found a combination of using the three of them, which worked for me, on top of doing things like NAET treatments for food allergies and sensitivities, even was like sensitive to calcium and vitamin B and like all the basics in food. So my body wasn't able to absorb any of that stuff. That changed a lot. I was on a mast cell deactivator called ketotifen, which helped to lower the histamine levels in my body so that I could start to try to digest food and then possibly introduce new foods in, or old new foods in. And then I was doing Kundalini. I was doing energy work with a couple different practitioners, and the combination of all those things. I also did stem cell therapy in 2018, debatable whether that did absolutely anything or not, because I'm the only one in my stem cell group of 5 other people that had any kind of like improvement, let alone like full recovery. And I also knew another person who was there and had it done too, and also didn't have that. So only saying that because there was something beyond that treatment that was what I was able to pull myself out of this through. So yeah, that's kind of my magic pill that I found in myself, along with doing like a ton of shadow work, boundary setting, getting out of a relationship that wasn't serving me or the other person, fully like reevaluating absolutely everything and all my perspectives on life, just little things.
Oh my goodness. It's interesting because it sounds like you and I got sick around the same time. I was older, but a lot of the same stuff. And with my Lyme disease, the thing was, heavy doses of antibiotics, which made me really, really sick. But there were a lot of cases of people who got better through that. And I remember the coffee enemas. They didn't help me so much, but the enemas in general was just a really big thing back then. And now I don't really hear anyone talking about them. Let me know in the comments. Are enemas still a thing for you guys? Personally, I'm glad they're not in my life anymore, but I know clearly some people find it helpful. So I'm just curious to drill down a bit more into these things that you did work for you. So you explained the diet component a bit, and a lot of the life changes and the stress changes that a lot of people talk about, changing their environment to a healthier place to be. And you mentioned brain training, do you say, as well? What did that look like?
Yeah, brain retraining was, I believe, the biggest component of it all. It was what tied it all together and what was the thing for me that I was able to pull myself out of this through. So brain retraining, I started with the DNRS program, Dynamic Neuro Retraining System, and that gave me a basis to understanding how the neural pathways worked, how my vagus nerve worked, and how I had these stories and beliefs that I built for myself, whether it was through the world around me teaching me that, or, things that I just had ingrained in myself through the years that weren't serving me, that were like allowing me to stay in this state of sickness, of disease. And so that gave me a great basis. About the same time that I started the brain retraining, I was also starting breath work and cold therapy. So the three of these together were huge. So brain retraining is diving into recognizing the patterns of behavior as they're happening, recognizing and catching your symptoms as they come up, and reframing that in your mind, like these used to be things that happened to me, and now I choose to live a different way. And when you first start this, of course, this is etherical. It's the repetition of it and the futurizations of it that is what leads to the results. And it can take a while to do that because it's, just changing your entire beliefs in your life. And then what I did was, so when you do brain retraining, you have a training zone that you work in. So for instance, for my food allergies, as I was beginning to bring my body into a more alkaline state through breath work and cold therapy, through meditation, through Kundalini, through my environment around me, did mold remediation in the house, and just creating the cleanest environment around me that I could, and feeding myself with the cleanest foods, doing the breath work which was a Wim Hof style breath work, to bring an alkaline state to the body. When the body is at a neutral pH balance of 7, pathogens do not and cannot live in the body. So it's when our body becomes acidic from acidic emotions, from acidic food, from a toxic environment. All of these things allow the pathogens to stay in the body. So I was alkalizing through breath work and through my environment and food. Then also I was doing cold therapy. So when you do cold therapy and breath work, what happens is you're putting your body in shock. So you get in the cold water and your body goes wait a minute, something's happening. I need to survive here and now in this moment. So these pattern loops of behavior that your brain has picked up on doing over and over and over, POTS was a big thing that I was dealing with for a very long time, which is where your blood pressure drops and your heart beats really, really fast to compensate for that. So when I would stand up, I would get really dizzy and sometimes pass out. I was also extremely heat intolerant, which is a connection to the POTS as well. So I was working on this by using breath work and cold therapy to put my body into that state of shock. So cold water, obviously, it's going to shock you. When you're doing the breath work in the Wim Hof style breath work, you're also shocking the body through alkalosis. So you're bringing in a ton of oxygen in the body very quickly, and it's shocking the system so that the body is going, wait a minute, what are we doing? I don't understand this. We need to survive here and now. And when the body is trying to figure out how to survive here and now, it can't go into those past loops of behavior that it used to go into, going into POTS, going into food allergies, releasing that histamine, nervous system, vagus nerve. You're training the vagus nerve in these moments. So I decided to acutely use these opportunities to train myself out of these behaviors. So I would, for instance, do a few rounds of breath work, then take a bite of a food that I was sensitive to, and then immediately do more breath work. So in that moment, I alkalized my body before I took the bite, put my body into a parasympathetic state, and then would take the bite there and immediately do another round of breath work to keep my body in that parasympathetic state. So it couldn't release the histamines in that moment, and the food allergies would not come up. So I was retraining my body to unlearn the behavior of histamine release upon those foods. And the reason that that happened for me was because I had leaky gut. So the gut starts to leak. The molecules of food that are too big for your body to do anything with seep through the intestinal walls, and the white blood cells come to those molecules that are too big, and it basically eats them up and says, wait a minute, we need to recognize this food as something that's going to harm our body. So it puts a histamine release out to that. So my body had learned that response. Now I was unlearning that response and showing my body that it was safe to eat these foods as I was healing my gut, and the leaky gut was healing up.
This is absolutely incredible. I really appreciate how you've explained all this so well. And I'm thinking about, people like us who got sick a few years ago. People weren't really talking about this in 2009, or I think, my mom had this as well, and definitely no one was talking about it. I'm just thinking, what if someone had come to you quite a few years back when you're just in the throes of this and you're so physically sick, you can't eat, you're like all these incredibly physical symptoms, and someone had said to you, the answer is going to be like cold water and breathing and some brain exercises. What would you have thought? I know it's more than that. I've really oversimplified. It's a lot of different things that contributed, but it just feels like there's a shift in thinking now, and I don't even know if I was ready for that, in 2009.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you on that. And I think that's like the divide between healing right now. And I think so there's two components to that. One is like where I was personally mentally at that time, and what I was ready to acknowledge was my own responsibility for my healing, and not looking outside of myself anymore for like a doctor to fix me and heal me. And then second to that was we did not have the resources available to us at that time. They just weren't out there. Nobody was talking about like breath work. Wim Hof method wasn't a thing. And cold therapy definitely wasn't something that I'd ever heard of. So I think there was like double components to answer your question about me personally. In 2009 and 2006, when I first was like had the symptoms happen, and when I was first diagnosed, I was not in a place to take that responsibility and to understand that. And I think that's a crucial part of the healing experience, is that sometimes we need to go through whatever that is. We need to hit a wall. We need to hit rock bottom. We need to see how bad it can get before we decide that we can heal ourselves. And that's like, we've all been in a version of that. So it's like, if you're hearing this for the first time and kind of going like, what is she talking about? It's understandable. Like that's part of our healing process. And I think it takes a lot to see this view of healing. And because, there are people who have gone and got IV antibiotics and have healed from that. If that isn't what's going to heal you, then it's not the infection that's the cause. It's something deeper than that. Yeah.
And, I'm so fascinated by this now, because virtually everyone I talk to has some sort of version of what you've shared. Every story is a bit unique, but there's a lot of these components of the neurological and nervous system origin of a lot of these symptoms. And so I'm really diving into researching and reading, and I thought this was a lot of just anecdotal, or we didn't have a lot of science to back it up. But in the last 10 years, there's been major scientific advancements in our understanding of, our brain's role in causing symptoms, especially with chronic pain. So, it takes a long time for that to trickle down to your doctor's office and to trickle down, unless you're out there reading medical papers, you're probably not going to know about this. But it is nice, so for people watching, if this all just sounds a bit like woo, like it, the science is catching up with it, at least with parts of this. And we have so many people that are coming back from really serious illness, like yourself, using these techniques that sometimes I think sound too simple, or maybe like they're invalidating the condition. Like, no, that's not going to work for me. But it's incredible how powerful they are.
Absolutely. And I think it takes like an average of 17 years for something new to come into like our Western medical system. But doctors are starting to see this. Like you said, they're doing studies like this proof is out there. Like so many people by, the thousands and millions are having full recoveries from this. Like I'm just one of the so many. And when I was first beginning to even believe that it was possible, I was watching video after video after video of people who had cured themselves through these methods. And that isn't to say it's solely brain retraining, solely breathwork, and solely cold therapy. I also was eating a good diet. I was, surrounding myself with a good environment and good people, and doing supportive therapies like acupuncture and NAET and on a mast cell destabilizer, so it wasn't just like an ethereal, like, oh, I'm just going to do this stuff, but I had tried everything else prior to that. I've tried all these supplements and all these IVs, and that wasn't the thing that did it for me. I was only worse after those.
Looking back on my journey now, one of the things I try to figure out is, because I did all these things to recover, and I have, this idea in my head of the things that got me to be fully well, and I wrote a book about it and detailed it all out. And, I still believe in all those things because they all made me really healthy and they got me to where I am. But what I now question, I look back, like my gut health was a mess, and I had all these infections and UTIs and yeast infections and candida overgrowth. And these were very real things, and these were very real problems. And the changes that I made in my life healed my gut. Those infections I haven't had in years, none of that's come back. But was that healing the chronic fatigue syndrome, or was that just generally getting my body healthy? I think most of us think there's a connection between all of it. But I question it. Now I look at the things that were helping me heal certain things in my body. Yes, they were good, and I was healing things, but was that the CFS? Was that necessary for the CFS symptoms to go away? I don't know. When you look back on your journey, do you have any different, insights or understandings of what you went through?
I've largely started to see it from like a pH balance standpoint of, if we create emotions based on our thought. Those emotions can be ones that benefit us, like joy, peace, happiness. Those are going to be hormones that our body produces, which are alkaline, which are neutral, which keep our body at a great balance. We can also have an experience of thoughts that lead to anger, that lead to anxiety, that lead to frustration, that lead to irritability. So when we allow ourselves to go into a place of experiencing that on a regular basis, those emotions, which turn directly into hormones, create an acidic balance in the body. So if we're in a stressful home environment as a child, we're probably going to be beginning to produce these more acidic experiences in our body at a very young age. And that is not our fault. That is something that, we were born into, that, we are experiencing. Now, as we become an adult, that's when we start to have control over our environment. That's when we start to have control over our food, because as a kid, we're served food and told to eat it. But then as we become an adult, we can choose to eat those alkaline foods, eat those foods that are really going to nourish our body. We can choose the relationships that we want to be in. We can choose the work environments that serve us. We can choose the activities that bring us joy, and we can begin to get a hold on our emotions in a different way, through calming the mind, through mindfulness, through meditation, through experiencing shadow work and all these things. So if our body is in an alkaline state altogether, our symptoms entirely will start to clear up. So whether that's emotional or physical, whether that's neurological, whether that's muscular, whether that's cognitive, all of these things are basically the body's responses in your own body. It's going to be super unique and totally different than the person sitting next to you, that are going to create some combo of imbalance within the body through this acidic state.
You're talking about the environments that you're in. It reminded me that when you and I were talking prior to this interview, kind of, getting ready for it. And I remember reading, you wrote something about it was important for you at one point to just not be around people that cared about their health or just weren't fixated on it. So what was that about?
Yeah. So right after I started driving again in October of 2019, and I used that as the marker of huge change in my life, because driving gives you back so much freedom and liberation. You can potentially start working again. You can get yourself your own food and everything like that. After that, I spent like about a year and a half of still like recovering, getting slowly back into life, starting to like work some gig jobs and stuff. And I realized I needed to get myself out into nature was one big thing, because I just felt way better in nature. And secondly, I needed to get myself into an entirely different environment than anything I was familiar with. Like you may have heard, like you cannot heal in the environments that you became sick in. So allowing yourself to have as much mobility away from that as possible. Now you may say like, well, I'm married and I have like kids, then that's going to look different than what my story was. I did have that opportunity to just like move away, go to Tahoe, and I saw an ad on Craigslist to become a whitewater raft guide with no experience. I literally had zero experience. I'd never been whitewater rafting, and I just moved up there and got totally away from everything. I was the worst by far in my class. I was just coming out of like severe chronic illness. I was, it was socially, mentally, and physically demanding in ways that I couldn't have even anticipated. But that experience of being fully immersed in something, and talk about survival, it was survival in another way. It's like literally getting through being in the snow on a raft in the spring. So it was like in learning an entirely different thing. Now, everybody's going to have a different version of becoming a whitewater raft guide, but getting out of that brain retraining, getting out of that pattern of behavior, that familiarity, the people that I was around, I needed that. And I needed to step away from focusing and being I was now in a place where I did not have to hyper focus on my food, on like doing my practices, my detoxes. Like I had moved away from that. However, I still had a ways to go, and it wasn't easy. I literally like was by far the worst in my class. I barely made it through to like my driver's test to become a raft guide. It took me 3 times to pass the test. But that was almost like forgetting that I had been sick was like the end of my brain retraining. So it was like I needed to fully remove myself from that mindset of a sick person. And so for me, moving away and getting out of that was the way that I did that.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important component, or a really important point with that. I did something similar, and many people have commented that not everyone has that luxury. Once I was somewhat functional and somewhat better, I went to Southeast Asia. I was still sick, but I could kind of get around. And I'd been hyper-focused for 2 years and pretty much felt like the only thing I talked about was my health. Every ounce of my thought went into my health. And then I just made a commitment for about a year, and not one word came out of my mouth about my health. I never talked to a single person. No one knew that I had health problems. I was good at hiding it. And I think it makes a big difference, taking that focus off of symptoms. And I think if you don't have the luxury to, go out whitewater rafting or go out to Southeast Asia, I think you can still change your environment in the place that you live, the way you interact with the people around you, the way they interact with your health, your recovery journey. Because, many people I interviewed did so, in kind of the physical location where they got sick. They made a lot of changes in that environment, but, they didn't need to go somewhere. But I think if you can, it's also, it can be a really healing thing.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you did that too. And I think it can be like maybe finding a job that has nothing to do with that, or finding like an activity that you really like and just going and being with like a group of people who don't know your previous story. That can be huge. And it was actually really hard for me, like, to not talk about that. And I almost wanted to be like, but do you know what I just went through? Do you know how hard it was for me to get here? Cause like I couldn't really even relate to anybody outside of the healing world, cause that had been my entire compass for so long, was just focused on getting through the day and surviving another day. And then now I'm in this group of people that are not even thinking about like what they're eating or like what they're, like nothing, like totally not aware of that stuff. And to most of a degree. And like, that was almost like hard for me to like kind of step back and be like, don't talk about this.
Yeah. And the nature component has been been big with so many people I talked to. And, people didn't have to move to Tahoe, but, I remember one woman who really credited the squirrels in her backyard as being a big part of her healing journey, just getting outside and feeding them and spending time with them. And, I was out hiking last weekend, and I remember thinking, like, being out in nature, and it's just so radically different than the world that I live in. But the world I live in is so radically different than the one we evolved to thrive in. And if we're working at turning off those, oversensitive fear responses, or, whatever we want to call it in our nervous system, our brain, getting kind of into nature is a really good way to just, I think, calm your system down, calm your brain down, and put it in an environment where it's just like, okay, I recognize this as safe, whether that's the park, the squirrels in your backyard, playing with your puppy, but something.
Yeah, even just getting your feet in the grass, like that's something huge.
Yeah.
And there's like, talk about like studies, of this like more esoterical thoughts. They have like done scans where just putting your feet in the grass lowers the inflammation in your body like tremendously.
Yeah, we have we're conductors. We have this kind of synergistic relationship with the earth, and we're meant to put our bare feet on the ground. Like, there's so many things that we're so detached from the way our bodies evolved to thrive. So that's why I think these little things that seem little, that so many people talk about, are actually really massive. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now that you're here, you're doing so well, you're healthy. I hear that you also have a wellness business. So tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I coach people through wellness coaching. I studied Ayurveda, so I used Ayurvedic principles, traditional Indian medicine to heal myself. I also help people make brain retraining more fun. So if you've started a brain retraining program and you're just looking for some little tips and tricks and fun things to keep inspired, I'm really good at coming up with ideas to make the training more fun using things that are already joyful to you, because that's the whole purpose of brain retraining, is finding the joy in it all. I also do energy work. I'm an intuitive energy worker. So that has been something that I learned to do through my own healing by receiving energy work from others. And through my near-death experiences, I ended up kind of having a little bit of a connection to the spirit world there. And yeah, so I also help people with breath work and cold therapy, implementing that into their life and beginning that journey as well.
Amazing. Yeah. And for people watching, all of this will be linked in the video description. So I highly encourage you to go check it out. Kimberly has some really amazing things. She's obviously an incredible wealth of information. So really worth going to check out, her website and all her different platforms that she's sharing information. Well, thank you so much. I always say I'm going to try and keep these short, and then it's usually me yapping too much and we end up going too long. But I just, it's just a wealth of information. We're just saying, it looks like the sun is trying to really light you up here. You're literally a beacon of sunshine for us right now. But I really appreciate you sharing all of this. You've summarized things so well, so much really great information, so many good insights. I know people will appreciate it, Kimberly. So thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, thank you so much for having this podcast and having this platform to bring people on to share that it's possible to heal.
Yeah. And, you had said that those recovery stories started being really big, and that's what a lot of people say. So people watching, I'm sure they're there, but I'll link on the screen a playlist of full recovery stories. There are so many, from people coming back from all different sorts of circumstances. So yeah. And even people say once they recover, they find watching them still really helpful, because it just, it can be a bit, sometimes, unsettling going out into the world. Like, am I really okay? And it's just good to have these reminders about, all the self-care stuff. Yeah. So yeah, thank you again to you. Thanks to you to those of you who are watching. I'd love to hear in the comments what you think of this, any questions that you have, any topics that you have that you'd like to see covered in future videos. I want to put out things that are helpful for you. So thank you for watching. I hope you got something out of this. I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope to see you maybe in one of these other full recovery videos.